There is a small drawer inside the Cathedral of Seville, and what it holds is not a body. It holds fragments, splinters of bone in a lead casket, degraded, discolored, adding up to roughly 15% of one man's skeleton. That drawer is supposed to contain Christopher Columbus, the most documented explorer of the entire age of sail. And in October of 2024, a forensic team stood before cameras and declared, with what they called absolute certainty, that these fragments were his, and that the man everyone had been taught was the son of a Genoese wool weaver was in fact a Spanish Jew who hid his own origins to survive. There is only one problem: that certainty has never passed peer review. And a second tomb, a rival tomb across the Atlantic in Santo Domingo, holds a lead box inscribed with Columbus's own name, and its keepers have refused for more than a century to let anyone open it and test what is inside. So we have a man whose face is on statues in a dozen countries, whose voyage in 1492 split history into before and after, and we cannot say with confidence where his body lies or whose blood ran in his veins. What makes this stranger is that the scientists themselves did not expect this. The lead investigator spent more than 20 years on the case, and for much of that time his results came back inconclusive, unreadable, useless. Even the experts closest to the bones spent years unsure whether the fragments in that drawer belonged to Columbus at all. Now, let's talk about what the evidence actually shows. The spine of this entire story is a single day in 2003, when Jose Antonio Lorente, a professor of forensic medicine at the University of Granada, working with the historian Marcial Castro, did something no one had managed before. He opened 3 tombs at once. He opened the crypt in Seville said to hold Columbus. He opened the grave of Columbus's younger brother Diego, and he opened the resting place of Columbus's son Hernando, a man who had built one of the great libraries of Renaissance Europe. The idea was elegant. If you cannot be certain about the father, you triangulate him through the men whose blood he shared. It was an ambitious project, running across decades, and it was contentious from the very first hour for one blunt reason. The Seville crypt did not contain a man, it contained about 15% of one. The bone was old, the genetic material inside it was degraded, contaminated, and scarce. And when the first samples went into the machines, roughly 80% of what came back was indecipherable. To understand what the team was up against, you need one distinction that runs through this whole story. Inside your cells, there are 2 very different kinds of inherited DNA. There is the DNA of the Y chromosome, which passes only from father to son, down the male line, the line that carries the surname. And there is mitochondrial DNA, which passes only from a mother to all of her children, down the maternal line, and which tends to survive in old bone far better than the rest. Everyone agreed that if Lorente could read either line cleanly, he could finally settle a question that had been open for 500 years. The first thing the bones gave up, though, was not about where Columbus was born. It was about whether the body was even his. The first answer came from the wrong relative entirely. The plan had been to match the Seville remains to Hernando, the son, through the Y chromosome, father to son, the cleanest possible link. But Hernando's Y chromosome was too degraded to read. The paternal line, the line of the name, went dark. What saved the identification was the brother. When the team compared the mitochondrial DNA of Diego, the younger brother, against the mitochondrial DNA pulled from the Seville fragments, they matched. And this is where that distinction earns its weight. 2 brothers share a mother, which means they share her mitochondrial DNA almost perfectly. And because mitochondrial DNA survives in old bone when the fragile Y chromosome does not, it is often the only signal left to read. The analysis showed what the investigators called an absolute correspondence between the mitochondrial DNA of the brother and the mitochondrial DNA of the remains. So the body in Seville was real. It was a Columbus. But notice what a maternal match to a brother can and cannot tell you. It confirms the identity of the bones. It says nothing whatsoever about where that family came from. And where the family came from was the question the entire world actually wanted answered. So the team went looking for Columbus in a phone book. If you cannot read the origin off the bones directly, you build a reference population and compare. The reasoning was clever. A man born in Genoa, in Liguria, would have carried the Italian surname Colombo. A man born in the Catalan-speaking lands of Spain would have carried the Catalan version, Colom. So the researchers collected DNA from more than 350 living men named Colom across the Catalan countries and from more than 100 Italian men named Colombo, and they genotyped 17 markers along the Y chromosome for each of them, work later published in the European Journal of Human Genetics in 2011. The hope was that the modern surname would braid backward through the male line to a single ancestral origin. It did not. The analysis showed that the Colomb surname is what geneticists call polyphyletic. The men who carry it do not descend from one shared ancestor. They come from many different origins, many different families, tangled together under one common name. Surnames, it turned out, do not thread cleanly back to one Columbus, no matter how much we wish they did. Now, at exactly this point, a fair objection lands because there is a mountain of paper that seems to settle the whole thing. The state archives of Genoa are full of notarial deeds, tax rolls, and family records naming a Colombo household, and for generations, that paper trail was treated as proof of the Italian Columbus. At first glance, it looks decisive, but a closer look tells a different story. Those same archives contain more than one man of the same name in the same period, names repeating and overlapping until the trail blurs. And in the whole documentary record of Columbus's own life, across thousands of pages he wrote or dictated, there is not a single surviving document written in Ligurian, the everyday language of Genoa. The man wrote in Castilian. Think of it like this: a DNA profile, or a surname, is a fingerprint. And a fingerprint lifted perfectly from a crime scene is worthless until you have a confirmed print to match it against. Without a trustworthy reference, even a flawless sample points nowhere. The Genoa archives were supposed to be that reference print, and they turned out to be smudged. What finally reframed the origin question was not a surname at all. It was 3 genetic markers hiding in the DNA of the son they had almost been unable to test, because the most unsettling reading came from Hernando, after all. Years after that first failure, with improved methods, Llorente's team returned to the son's remains, and in 2024, they announced that markers within Hernando's DNA across both the Y chromosome and the mitochondrial line were, in their words, compatible with a Jewish origin. Not Genoa, not an Italian wool weaver's house, a Sephardic family from the Western Mediterranean, quite possibly the region of Valencia, a family that would have had every reason to hide its faith after 1492, the very year of the voyage, the year Spain expelled its Jews. The analysis showed a pattern the team read as consistent with that ancestry. But hold on to the exact phrase, because everything hangs on it. Compatible with is not the same as proves. A marker being consistent with a population is a door left open, not a fact nailed down. It is a lead, and a serious one, but it is a lead that still needs a reference it can be checked against. This was the finding that went around the world in a single day. Yet the way it was announced is the strangest part of the entire story. Because this discovery did not arrive in a scientific journal, it arrived on television. The absolute certainty, the Sephardic origin, the solved 500-year mystery, all of it was announced through a documentary broadcast on Spanish public television called in English Columbus DNA, His True Origin, on the 12th of October, 2024. It has never been submitted for peer review, and the moment it aired, other scientists pushed back hard on a specific point. There is no gene for Jewishness. Religion is a culture, a faith, a history, a set of practices. It is not a sequence you can read off a chromosome. You can identify markers common in a population that has intermarried for centuries. But the leap from a genetic pattern to a religious identity is exactly the kind of leap that peer review exists to catch. And underneath that leap sat the same fragile foundation as everything else. 15% of a skeleton, most of its samples unreadable, a conclusion built on the small fraction that could be recovered. Peer review and the release of the full data are not bureaucracy. They are the chain of custody of a scientific claim. They are how a result gets handled, checked, and signed for on its way from a laboratory to the truth. Without that chain, compatible with quietly collapses back into might be. The analysis, in the end, could not show what the broadcast said it had shown. And there is one tomb that could break the tie, a tomb whose keepers have refused to open it for more than 100 years. So if Genoa was never truly proven, where did all the certainty come from in the first place? The Genoese Columbus was built, brick by brick, out of that mountain of same-named paperwork, and then hardened in the 19th century, when a newly unifying Italy had every reason to claim the man who discovered a new world as one of its own. National pride is a powerful adhesive, Around the same time, Spain claimed him, Portugal claimed him, and a scattering of other places floated their own candidates, each version serving somebody's flag. A story repeated in enough schoolbooks stops feeling like a theory and starts feeling like a fact, even when the evidence underneath it was always contested. The resting place was built the same way. When Columbus died in 1506, his bones began a journey longer than some of his voyages. He was buried in Spain, then moved to Santo Domingo. Then, as empires shifted, shipped to Havana, and finally, when Spain lost Cuba in 1898, carried back to Seville. Then, in 1877, workers digging in the cathedral in Santo Domingo unearthed a lead box bearing an inscription that named the illustrious and distinguished man, Don Cristobal Colon. From that day, the Dominican Republic has insisted it holds the real Columbus, that the remains never left the island, and it has never permitted its box to be opened for genetic testing. So there are two tombs, two certainties, two national stories, and only one of them has ever let science through the door. Both beliefs, the Italian birth and the Caribbean grave, are products of their time and their interests far more than they are products of evidence. And that points to the deepest problem of all, which is not which story is true, but how little we can actually confirm about any of it. There has never been a full skeleton. There has never been a peer-reviewed paper. There has never been an open tomb in Santo Domingo. Sit with that for a moment. The man who reshaped the map of the world, whose life is documented in letters and logs and court records more thoroughly than almost anyone of his century, comes down to us in the physical evidence as roughly 15% of a body, one maternal line match to a younger brother, and an origin claim broadcast on television before it was ever published. The one clean genetic signal in the whole affair does not even run through the line the legend is built on. It runs through his mother, the Y chromosome, the paternal line, the line of the surname Colombo or Colomb that 1,000 men were tested to trace, stayed silent, too broken to read. Everything the myth is named for went dark, and the only clear voice that came back came down the mother's side. The certainty, it turns out, was always borrowed, so let us state it plainly. The surnames do not braid back to one man. The Sephardic origin is a serious lead, not a confirmed fact, and the resting place is only half proven, because the tomb that could contradict Seville has never been opened. The body and the bloodline both rest on fragments. But here is what that does not mean. It does not mean the documented Columbus disappears. The crossing of 1492 happened, the 4 voyages happened, the letters exist, the ship's records exist, and the long, brutal colonial aftermath he set in motion is written into the history of 2 continents and does not soften by a single degree, because a laboratory cannot read his chromosomes. Genetics was never going to rewrite what the man did. It can only unsettle who he was and where his bones now lie. Those are different questions, and it matters that we keep them apart. The uncertainty is about identity and origin, not about the historical record of his actions, which stands exactly where it stood. Which brings us back to that drawer in Seville, and the fragments in the lead casket, the 15% of a man that a nation treats as a national treasure. Knowing everything we now know, look at that drawer again. It is not proof. It is a question that we long ago agreed to treat as an answer. We built a birthplace out of smudged archives, and a grave out of a moved box, and an ancestry out of a broadcast. And we called the whole assembly settled, because certainty is more comfortable than doubt, and because a man that important is supposed to be knowable. But the truth sitting in that casket is that even our most mythologized figures rest, in the end, on evidence as thin as a strand of degraded bone. The most famous explorer in history is, physically, a handful of splinters and a single line of a mother's DNA. What we choose to believe about him, standing over an answer this fragile, is not something science can hand us. That part has always been up to us.